Welcome to KelbyOne podcast. And of course, as always, we have a super awesome guest on the show. But before we get there, just be reminded that if you are listening to the audio version of this podcast, you can see our beautiful faces in full Technicolor over on YouTube, youtube.com/KelbyOne. As always, same thing as every week, really. So that being said, please welcome the rocket photographer, the co-host of The Grid on Kelby One, creator of some of the most amazing cinemagraphs that I've ever seen, actually. Give it up for Mr. Erik Kuna. Erik, how are you?
Hey, man.
Oh, hey, how's it going, guys? Thanks for that intro. I'm not sure if looking at Plotograph and Plotiverse, the stuff out there is amazing. So it's an honor to just be at that level. So cool.
Man, I've been trailing through your cinemagraphs. It's so fascinating. It's just like you get into a trance just looking at them, you know?
Yeah, it definitely does. But, I have to admit, I have an interesting subject that definitely plays into cinemagraphs. So I'm kind of cheating in that sense. So.
Yeah. I did, when cinemagraphs first came out a few years ago, when it sort of became a thing, I made one, which was essentially like, I had a floating Rubik's Cube and it was like turning and it was floating above my hand. So I made one of those painstakingly in Final Cut Pro. I think I made it.
Ooh, wow.
How
many years ago was that?
Well, maybe like 2-3 years ago.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
How have I not seen this?
It was a profile picture on my Facebook profile for a long time. But I'm guessing it's a lot easier to do now.
Oh golly, it's so easy, and actually it's been easy. Probably all the pain that you had just a few years ago could have been alleviated with a $10 program. So there you go. Exactly. It is amazing. I used to do them back in the day. I mean, my start was actually in professional wise in video. So I came from video to photography, and we used to have to do a lot of stuff as far as like masking and rotoscoping and doing all this stuff back in the day that you really just don't have to do nowadays. The programs are so intuitive. But yeah, I use a lot of different programs. I mean, the one that I've really landed on for the cinemagraphs is Plotograph, or Plotiverse is actually the platform. But the Plotograph software, it's very easy to just set anchor points, mask out certain areas, and then set your animations. And to the point of which then you just hit the export button, tell what resolutions you want or what platforms you're going to, and it'll just export your file. So it's really a lot of that mystery of them has been kind of demystified with the ease of these programs that are out there. And there's others, but they're definitely the one that I gravitate towards.
Well, for those listeners and viewers who may not necessarily be aware what a cinemagraph is, it's essentially like an animated photograph.
Yeah. I mean, recently I shot it's with the Inspiration 4 launch. So it was 4 astronauts. They were private citizens, or they weren't formally trained by NASA or a space agency. They were actually trained by SpaceX, private citizens, to be launched up. And one of those shots where we had we call them nebula shots. It's kind of a shot that kind of came over years of just kind of working at it. But it's like the gases of the rocket are expanding out into the upper atmosphere, and you get this illumination effect that's going on, and that lends itself to being animated very easy. And what was cool about that is for that launch, we did that, and we animated the still, and it really went viral to the point at which we had like news agencies all over the world reaching out to my agency, all the way to Australia was one of the ones down there. The ABC out of Australia picked it up as well and ran with it. So just had this cool effect where you could see the gases moving and the astronauts on top of that being launched out into space. So really cool.
Wow. Well, so that's the thing. I mean, astrophotography obviously is a thing that even I've heard of before and possibly attempted once or twice, miserably, badly. But I mean, rocket photography, that's like a whole other level.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's definitely one of those where where you're getting down into very deep into a subgenre, right?
Exactly.
But you know what it was is it merges a lot of the things that I love. I'm always a fan of with your photography, and that's something that I figured out over my career is I gravitate back towards the things that are my passions or that I love, and that comes out in your work. If you're doing something that you really just you don't enjoy or not into, I think that infects your photography, and you can tell. I mean, not that you can't just do a job and all that, but it's much better. For example, with me, that I'm able to go capture something I love and make that part of my living or my income as well. So it's really nice where I wouldn't have that same passion. Like I've tried out years before, I just don't have that same passion for wedding photography or portraits or even, I don't know, macro, and stuff like that. I just don't have that kind of fire or that passion for it. But what I do have a passion for is astrophotography, night photography, aviation photography, landscape photography, and that all kind of merged with rocket photography. So what happened with me was just it was SpaceX that did it for me. I was always into the space program. I was always, growing up in Florida, you kind of become you see rockets, your house shakes because the space shuttle comes over it, and you see rockets launched from your backyard. So you just kind of like have that in you. But I was never really like super passionate about it, but I was really passionate about image making and capturing history and documenting our world. And when I saw what SpaceX especially SpaceX, but others were doing in the space, it was back in 2015. I just said, "Hey, I've got to go in. I've got to go all in on this. I got to share this story." And the images that were coming out at the time, they were very much just focused on the photojournalism of it. It was a shot of a rocket lifting off. No real art to it, or no real like deeper meaning to the picture. It's just kind of like it's again photojournalism. So I always try to like with my photography, my driving force has been to interject a little bit of that art into photojournalism with my work, and that's why I get drawn to the things I get drawn to. And where I've landed to where I've landed, where I work with a creative agency, my news outlet gives me the ability to do those creative things where I don't have to just get the photojournalism shot. I can do the bizarre thing that nobody else is doing that now has become a thing. And that's like those nebula shots. I mean, nobody was doing them years ago. I started doing it, and now it's become a thing. So, but that's cool to see that you're able to kind of like put a stamp and get people to kind of look beyond just that simple picture and look for a picture within the event.
Would you say that that's all the same reasons why you shifted originally from video to photo? Because you could, I don't know, perhaps create a single image more in keeping with something that you love versus perhaps a video of that.
Yeah, well, you know what I love, I have a place for video. I think video is awesome, totally. But I think what it is with photography is I love that single moment in time. It's like that single frozen moment in time. I also love to give dimension to a two-dimensional thing, like to actually I like sculpt light, shape light. That's also why I'm drawn to night launches, or it's why also I'll say that I tend to shoot from like when the sun's about to go down to where the sun's about to come up, and I avoid every other time during the day. So that's really just, I love light. I love shaping. I love capturing that in one frame. Not that you can't do that with video, but I love being able to tell that story in one frame.
I've loved the whole idea of space exploration ever since I was a kid. And also, just it's sort of it runs in my family. My uncle is actually a bona fide rocket engineer, basically.
Yeah.
And from a photographic point of view, I've always been extremely interested in that kind of imagery. And I think when the first time I came across your images, it was blatantly obvious there was sort of another level to it. It wasn't just a photojournalistic sort of depiction of the actual rocket launch. There's a lot more to it, especially when I came across one of your sort of most well-known images, I think, which is the image of it's sort of the launch trail, and you've got like a hut. There's like at a beach, and you've got a hut on the left-hand side.
Oh, the lifeguard stand.
Yeah, the lifeguard stand. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and there's like the launch. The rocket is actually streaking across the frame over a period of time. Yeah, that was, and see, that's a perfect example of where while everybody is doing like just like here's the rocket lifting off the pad. My agency, I was like, at that launch, it was they were launching something. The payload, the purpose of the payload was basically a lifeboat, or it was supposed to be something that we're going to explore how to survive. And that's where I said to my editor, hey, lifeguard stand, what if we had the rocket like emanating from a lifeguard stand on the beach? Because, looking at the trajectories, looking at everything, I knew where I could go and I could kind of get this shot. And they're like, yeah, let's do that. Let's not go get the boring shot that everybody, not that it's not cool. It's really cool to be 3 miles away from a rocket when it goes off, and there's 40 other photojournalists that'll be right next to me with their 400 millimeter or 800 millimeter lens, just like me. And we'll all get that shot and it's going to be awesome. But there's that next level of, yeah, but that's just documenting the launch. Like, what do we do to tell that story? Or what do we do to capture something that people haven't seen to inspire them that they could one day do this? Because that's really kind of that's the goal with me, is I really want to inspire other people with the images, especially younger people, to go, this is possible. I think it probably will be possible in my lifetime that we'll be able to somewhat readily available go to space, but the next generation beyond me, it's definitely going to be there where there's going to be opportunities. So getting people excited about that and seeing the beauty of that and the beauty of just our universe, I think it really helps us to see how small we are, to see our place in the universe, but then to realize how big of an impact we could have on that by the things that we do. And I hope that comes out sometimes in the images of just inspiring people to kind of like check out space and check out space exploration and space travel and stuff like that.
See, I thought it got really exciting when, companies like SpaceX, for example, and Blue Origin, started popping up, and all of a sudden it wasn't just sort of government-run agencies that, went to space. The only thing that sort of frazzled me a little bit is like, why call it SpaceX? Surely you should have called it something cool like the Rebel Alliance or something like that.
Well, it was weird, as it was actually, hey, I don't know. Elon is kind of like he's the Tony Stark, right? He is definitely the Tony Stark of our generation, but he's definitely one where sometimes you don't understand it. Like the company in the beginning was actually called Space Exploration Technologies. It still is. That is their official name, is Space Exploration. And that's where SpaceX comes from, is space exploration. And so it's better than Space Exploration Technologies. But so there you go. So SpaceX, and it's grown on me, and it's grown on I think a lot of people. But Blue Origin, on the other hand, I'm not sure about that one. I'm not sure I could get anywhere with that one.
No. The rockets look fun.
Or the other one is like ULA. That doesn't inspire too much. Like SpaceX at least sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Sounds like NASA. NASA sounds kind of cool.
Yeah. But surely, you'd call your first spaceship, something like the Millennium Falcon or something. You just have to,
Not funny story. You know where the Falcon 9 gets its name from?
Oh, well,
does it really?
The Millennium Falcon.
Well, there you go. Well, that's it.
So there you go. Actually, you'd find in a lot of Elon's names or a lot of SpaceX's names, there is a lot of science fiction references.
Yeah.
He's big on that. He's big into the movie Spaceballs, which I'm into as well, and always that, or The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, one of his favorite books, that kind of weaves its way through. But even if you look at it, his thing, like anybody, that what their thing should be is, I'm going to make a great product. Not I'm going to come up with he doesn't really spend any money on PR or any of that stuff or advertising. It's just basically like, I'm going to make a great product. Just like us as photographers, if we make great images, people will see them, and more people will see them. And it's a process. It's not something that happens overnight, but we want to make great products. We just, a gimmick only lasts so long. Like if, you know what I mean? So.
Although you did do an image, a very similar image of one of the rocket launches with I think it was a Lego Millennium Falcon in the foreground.
Yeah. And that was for that reason that I just talked about. That's why we were telling the story of that, again, that weaving the stories of our science fiction toy fantasies of when we were young are becoming realities. And what it was is that was a launch where the Falcon 9 rocket was taking off and then landing back, and we had access to set up a remote camera only like 1.5 miles from the landing site. So that's where I had set out a Lego Millennium Falcon, and that was the whole thing of the story was about how our fantasies, our science fiction fantasies, are becoming realities. So this name of this rocket, the Falcon 9, is based on this Millennium Falcon toy that was part of our childhood, that now we're landing rockets back on Earth, which, you know, just a few years earlier, the top scientists were telling SpaceX it couldn't be done. It was impossible. It will never happen. And then they're landing it. And that's why I say that in 2015, what really inspired me was seeing them land a rocket. When you see that booster come down at the speed of sound, fire their engines, it just gracefully lands on the ground, and then you get smacked with those sonic booms from the rocket re-entering the atmosphere. I mean, it's powerful. It's like, wow, we can do that. If we can do that, we can do a lot of things.
Yeah, you know, I remember that day actually because I remember when they retired the space shuttle, and I remember thinking, oh no, that says we're not going back to the moon anytime soon. You know, because it felt like that was it. You know, space program was over. You know, and then
it did.
You know, and then things like SpaceX come back, and you know, and now it seems to be really right back. You know, at the forefront of exploration.
But that's only because there are a couple of individuals in the world who had the balls to go out there and go, you know what, this has to be done, and there's a good reason for it being done. If those two individuals weren't on this planet, or well, there's 3 or 4 of them, I guess, these days, but then no one would be doing it.
This sounds like you're talking about us in the podcasting world.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's right, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it just so happens that these people that got the drive to go and do it have a couple of shekels between them.
Yeah, that's not us.
Yeah, it definitely helps with something like space to have a large pocketbook.
Yeah, and really cool spacesuits. I mean, that's the other thing. That's the thing. You know, SpaceX spacesuits, cool.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, that's the thing. Like, and that's where again, the agency I cover for, Supercluster. If you haven't heard, check them out, supercluster.com. Definitely check them out. We've got, but that's really our driving force, is more about making sure that space is looking cool, and that space is for everyone, that it connects with everybody, that it isn't just something that's very highly technical, or there's no care to how things look. Because that's a big thing with SpaceX, or even Tesla, if you're going to say that. I mean, you know, like it's big on, even the buildings look cool, even the launch pads look cool. I mean, why did Elon spend all that money retrofitting a Launch Complex 49? I mean, or 39. It was doing fine. It launched the Apollo missions. It launched the space shuttle missions. But now it looks like a modern launch pad. And the reason being is that inspires people to do something. It, you know, if you're just like all old and it just looks like it's built in the 60s, it just doesn't inspire any confidence that this is the future.
You know, I was having a very similar conversation about something totally different the other day, about essentially buying gear, right? And we were talking about music and guitars specifically. And I got a new bass just a couple of years ago, right? And it did just that. It reinvigorated something inside me to go and better myself as a player again, and to try different things. And that's exactly what, it's not buying new gear for the sake of it. Is I needed something else to refresh myself. And that's exactly the kind of thing it does. It's like working in an office that looks like it's from the 60s still, with horrible fluorescent tubes going over your head, or do the office up, make it feel more modern. What happens to your employees? You suddenly feel more inspired to be there and to work. I say work hard just for the sake of it. But
actually, that's totally true, because that's exactly like throughout the lockdown here. I don't know if you're probably aware of this, but basically the UK was totally locked down at the beginning of the pandemic. Like, we went into like full on national lockdown, and so everybody started working from home, including myself. And I, in order for me to actually feel happy and inspired in that space, I had to completely redesign my work area. So I basically went out and I had a desk build and put new shelves up and lit the whole thing, just so it would be an inspiring, creative place for me to actually spend 8 hours a day. Because before that, I was sitting at an old ramshackle desk looking at the white wall, and it wasn't particularly inspiring. But I mean, that's this sort of this thing between functionality and design. Think to be functional, but it don't necessarily have to be inspiring. Now, I just want to come back to the original photograph of yours that we're talking about, with the lifeguard station and the trail. Now, I looked at that and I kind of thought, well, first of all, how much sort of pre-work do you have to put into an image like that? Like, how much preparation goes into actually creating an image like that? I mean, because on one hand, you can kind of think, do you just rock up and go like, okay, here we go, the launch pad's over there somewhere, or like, how much prep do you put into images like that?
Me personally, it is definitely slanted towards pre-work more than shooting. The planning phase is my longest phase. That goes for all my styles of photography, except for maybe if I'm shooting an air show, I can do some planning, but it's very much kind of whatever's being brought to the table a lot of times. I can study routines and stuff like that, but I can't really plan out where other things that I shoot, like this lifeguard stand, like that is we are planned out to a T. I know when exposures are going to start and stop. I know how it's going to be in the frame. But all that's from, again, a lot of painstaking research that has become easier and easier and easier over the years, to the point at which it's almost to the point where it's a great time to get into it, because no longer do we have a lot of the struggles that we used to have, especially with the shots that we're talking about here. So the shot that we're talking about, it's what we would call in the business a streak shot. It's something where the rocket is streaking across the frame. So you're getting that arch of the rocket as it's flying away from you. And because of the curvature of the Earth, it actually curves through your frame. Again, a two-dimensional image or two-dimensional plane, a three-dimensional world, it curves across the frame. So you get this arch. Well, the first thing with starting out is figuring out where I want to shoot my foreground. Is that going to line up with my background? Where this came in for me, that just like a very easy transition, is I love shooting Milky Way landscapes. Well, if you get into shooting Milky Way landscapes, the concept of your foreground and your background lining up, it's kind of like a no-brainer. It's probably the number one thing we do. Is I'm always looking at, well, is that to the south? Is my foreground, can I shoot to the south? Because if it's to the north, I'm never getting the Milky Way. So it's just like a common thing that you just, you're figuring out. So with that, we're trying to figure out the launch pad location, given the frame we're wanting. Then we got to figure out, well, the trajectory of the rocket. Rockets have different trajectories. In this case, that image was what we would call a geostationary orbit. So it was being launched to a spot on the Earth where it would stay in orbit around the planet at the same spot. Well, those go towards the equator. So from my position or my vantage point, that means it's going to fly almost due east, a little bit southeast. So that means that streak is going to go a certain way. Well, back in the day, actually, when I shot that, you had to kind of plan out and kind of go, well, here's where the Air Force has their warning, basically exclusion areas. The Air Force will say, you can't fly within these areas. You can't take boats within these areas. So that gave us a general idea of the path of the rocket. Then there's other things like, well, what orbit is it going to? How long it's going to have a first stage or second stage burn? So all these things go into it. And then we go back to that foreground had to line up with it. So the foreground lined up with it. The trajectory looked good. Okay, let's go try it. Now, the other thing then we got to start monitoring a day before is, well, what are the clouds going to be like? What's the weather going to be like? Is it going to be able to launch? When we get out there, is there going to be other people that we're going to deal with? How are we going to, isolate our frames, stuff like that? So those are all things that go into it. And then the actual shooting is only getting out to the location, setting up. Actually, the biggest time is getting the location early enough to set up to where you'll have no problems, right? And then you're out of location, you're all set up. The frame is only 3 minutes and 30 seconds or so. It's right around that first stage burn for that rocket. So that's the exposure time. And then the only thing I did with that one is that was a blend. So I took an exposure of the streak, and then I took an ambient exposure, which is similar to like a night photography, star photography shot, then comp those together. Right. And then comping those together, it's just a matter of, because the camera's not moving, it's taking and just changing my blend mode on my streak shot to screen in Photoshop, and boom, it's in there. So it's really not.
I thought that, when I was looking at it, we Nick and I have, like, throughout the pandemic, we've gotten into light painting cars. And so, when I looked at that shot, I kind of thought, like, this looks to me like the lifeguard station's been sort of light painted in a little bit. And then, of course, I came across another shot of yours, which had 3 Teslas lined up with a rocket streak.
Yes.
So, and then, because there's a certain look to light painted cars, and you kind of go,
those cars were light painted, and the lifeguard station was not. The lifeguard station was the ambient light from Cocoa Beach, directs that way and bays that's one of the advantages of that spot, was that it bays kind of the scene with that light pollution, but that kind of blends the scene very well. So where you could light paint it, and that's where I do either. I love, actually, with the Milky Way, doing low level light painting, where you actually take a very dim light and put it over your whole exposure. And you can do the same thing with that. I've done that actually with rocket shots as well, where you light paint the foreground at the same exposure settings as you would the entire shot. So it's just one shot all exposed, but you're only putting out like a little bit of light, like small, like, 7-10 lumens worth of light, so very dim. But yeah, that's what it was there. It was just, the rocket and then the foreground blended together, just one exposure after another. So
how do you determine your exposure time? I mean, how do you know how do you know how fast that rocket is going to fly? Do you know what I mean? I mean, how do you predetermine that?
So we used to. I'm telling you what we used to do. This is so much easier nowadays. So we used to have to study the press kits. They'd actually have all the stuff in there as far as first stage burns, second stage burns. Then we also know, based on different rockets and their trims, what their first stage and second stage burns. However, I say all that, there's an app now developed online. It's called flightclub.io. And it's actually written by a guy that I know, Declan. And Declan is a theoretical physicist. And what he did was just basically reverse engineer the flight paths of the rocket through physics, wrote a program that basically would all the information that we know, like thrust to weight ratios, the payload capacities, and he'd figure out the trajectories and all that stuff, put it into the software simulation, and started doing that. And it was like pretty good, and then it was like really scary good, and now it's to the point where people are getting I've tried this before, but it didn't work out. But people are actually able to take that software and get transit shots where he's figured out, the trajectory so well that you can actually get the moon transiting in front of the rocket or the sun transiting in front of the rocket because it's so accurate. But again, he is just doing math and just running a computer simulation, and I love it because nowadays that opens it up to so many people that wouldn't want to go through that process of, it used to be hours, and now I can plan out a shot with that software in maybe 30 minutes. It's just a matter of finding spots and plugging in trajectories and plugging it. I could plug in what equipment I'm using. I could say, I want to shoot this on a Canon full frame. I want to shoot this with a 15 millimeter lens, and it'll show you a 3D visualization of what that is using Google Maps.
That's like totally that's like previs.
Yep. That's exactly what it is. It's previs. What we used to do, or storyboarding back in video. You storyboard, you previs. You're able to pre-visualize your streak before you even go shoot it. And I think that's awesome that we've got to that point. Yes, phenomenal. It used to be the old way, do it. I feel like the old way was like I was doing it with film before. And now it's like the new way, and it's the modern way, and it's so easy. But I love that. A lot of people are upset that it has become so easy for people to do. But I'm kind of like, hey, more people can get into this, the more people can try it, the better.
The easier it is for people to get into it and do it and start creating amazing images, that's when things will start to move forward again, and we'll start, trying to be even more creative and to do something different and to push that. I hate using this word, but push that envelope of how these images look, right?
Well, but you can really take that, in a more simplified way. Take an app like PhotoPills, for example. Like how many times have I tried to work out based on like the iOS weather app when golden hour is going to be tomorrow, or next week or something. And now it's so much easier.
Sometimes between 1 p.m. and 8 p.m.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, something like an 8, basically like PhotoPills, for instance, makes that so much easier. It's like, and it gives you a whole range of other additional features that are just awesome to have in like one app. So again, you don't need to like calculate things like, depth of field or God knows what.
I'm still amazed that someone's created an app for rocket launches like that, because it's such a niche.
It's great.
But I'll tell you what, if you're into it and you want to know all the details about it, it's amazing. It is amazing. And that's what it comes down to. It is a niche, but you got to also think there's a lot of people that just they're very enthusiastic about space launches, space exploration. Yeah. So these people are into it as well, where they want to see from their location, like to the point of now, just the other day, I was out of town, but a couple of my friends, we were chatting back and forth, and there are other photographers that cover launches as well. And the Dragon capsule was coming back over the state of Florida and the state of Georgia. Well, through, again, Flight Club, we could actually track the entry point of the vehicle and actually plan a frame where they were able to get the plasma streak of the capsule coming back and landing in the ocean. And that's the kind of stuff that you'd have to have an inside like connection, which a lot of that stuff used to be very secretive because of is top secret. They didn't want to share any of that information, and still it's a little secretive, but it's cool that we have that ability to capture things like, one of the friends, he drove up, hours away from, where we were at, way up north to get this frame where the rocket's streaking across with the foreground, and it's really awesome to see, because when you look at that image, it's like, that's not a shooting star. That's not a meteor. That is a capsule coming back from the International Space Station carrying scientific research that is going to get picked up by a helicopter in just a matter of minutes.
Yeah,
just crazy.
But I just find it fascinating, because often you look at imagery, and you sort of think, well, either that's a lucky shot, or somebody was just at the right place at the right time. And then when you realize how much prep actually has to go into creating an image like that, and whether that's by the use of an app or whatever it may be, I just find it really fascinating to kind of to see behind the scenes. I mean, for us over here, of course, in Europe, rocket launches are so alien, literally, that I guess if I was stood on the beach and I saw a rocket go off, I think I'd totally forget to hit the shutter button.
Hey, most people do on their first rocket launch. They actually do forget to hit the shutter button because it's just overwhelming. It's amazing. In fact, I would tell people the first time they come to watch a rocket launch would be not to take any pictures of it. Just take it in, because it is amazing how the whole earth shakes and the ground shakes, and especially at night, it becomes daylight. It's like a mini sun that illuminates the whole world. It's crazy.
How many rocket launches do you think you've seen now in person?
Oh, I'm over 100. So
Awesome.
Now the closest I've been, closest I've been is 1.3 miles, and that was the loudest. That was actually getting to that unhealthy range where I was like, this feels like your whole chest, and it's just compressing, and it feels a little bit kind of like, maybe this is a little close, but it was amazing.
I mean, so this is actually the other thing that I find really intriguing is, access, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get special access for rocket launches generally, and how does that work?
Yeah, so you do have to get special access to go in some of the places that we shoot. Obviously, anytime we're on the NASA or the Air Force bases, it's a Space Force base now, but Space Force base is NASA property. That kind of stuff. We do have to get access. But that's all done through. It's photojournalism. So you're basically applying for credentialing. You're going through the credentialing process. I think where people sometimes get tripped up is they go, hey, I want to go shoot a rocket launch. So immediately they go to, let me become a credentialed media person, and like all that. And that's like the worst thing you can do. It's like anything. Like, in fact, I tell that story of when one of the big launches we were at, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but a big company with a lot of money that produces great videos, usually in that documentary realm, that has a worldwide presence, sends a big crew to cover these launches, and they walk away and they start contacting us saying, hey, our guys' footage is all blown out and nothing's exposed right. Do you guys have anything that we can use? Because they sent people that have never shot a launch before. They don't understand anything about it. And it's not that they weren't great cinematographers, it's not that they weren't great photographers. It's that whole thing of you have to kind of cut your teeth or just get that experience under your belt. But especially with those type of genres where you're really in a specialized area where it's not something. The other thing that I think people don't understand is we don't get any practice. Our practice is the launch. If we want to experiment with something, it's done at a launch. They don't set off like a rocket to go, hey, go experiment with your exposures. We're going to send up an $80 million rocket, so you guys can just test out your exposures. Like, we have to just practice and get that experience and figure out settings and figure out exposures and different. And then we have varying light conditions and learning how to deal with that. So say all that to say, like, that's where you have to go, is you have to kind of cut your teeth if you want to get into it by shooting as close as you can, shooting off property, getting the understanding of what's going on, and then working yourself up to where you can say, hey, here's my portfolio of work. News agency, would you credential me? Would you hire me to do this job? But I think people immediately go to, and then the other thing people immediately go to with me is they'll go, well, it's because you have the access that you get that shot. And it's like, well, yeah, it is the access, but it's also all the work that we did to get to the point of getting the access that gets the shot. Because I guarantee if I stick somebody out there and say, here's the equipment, go to town, what's going to happen is that same thing that happened to that big company that's spending millions of dollars. They get everything set up and they walk back with nothing because they don't believe me when I say the rocket engine exposure is going to be 1/8,000th of a second at F11 at ISO 100. Yeah. And they're like, no, that's going to be a black frame. And I'm like, okay, go for it. And then they come back with just a white frame.
Excellent. So. Do you, or back in the day or even still, do you shoot with multiple bodies with perhaps varied settings, varied frames perhaps?
Yeah, so you got to think with it's not the cheapest to cover, because it's one of those things where each camera is usually one shot. So my agency will want 4 shots a launch. That's kind of what we're contracted for. Now, again, a lot of times we can deliver more than that, or then we can work with other agencies as well. But if they want 4 shots, right, that means I got to have 4 separate cameras covering this. And then I got to make sure that all 4 cameras work. So a lot of times that's why I'm usually rolling out with like 6 cameras, and but you know what it usually is? Old bodies. Every piece of my gear that I take out there is all used. Mostly 5D Mark IIs, 7Ds is another popular one. Okay. 7D Mark II, those kind of bodies. So yeah, the images you see on my Instagram, my website, they're all kind of. Most of them are probably going to be from 5D Mark II or 7D. Those are the workhorses that go out to the pads. Like if it's a close rocket shot, because I cannot break those. I've tried to break them and they just don't break. They just keep on firing. And that's the point at which I say I'll replace it when it breaks, because at the end of the day, they really are just cameras. As long as you got the resolution and as long as you got the right settings, a mirrorless will be a little better. Or, this brand new body would be a little better, but it's not going to be astronomically better. It's going to be a little, especially with the rocket, because you're shooting most of the time at low ISOs because it's putting off so much light. It will add just a touch of convenience for you more than anything else, I think.
Your images are absolute proof that these bodies used to take a fantastic shot. These bodies still take a fantastic shot.
Well, I mean, it's not like we didn't know how to create great imagery before the Canon R3 came out.
You're right.
So I mean, that's the thing, and plus, I mean, with what you do, you don't need a lot of the gimmickry. Like you don't need, autofocus, any of that kind of jazz, because it doesn't really apply.
Does the R3 have rocket focus? I forget.
Probably just the next thing. Rocket focus.
That actually seems like something Canon would do. They'd go so specific. You'd be like, surprised.
What? Face, eye, eagle, rocket.
Nostril.
I love it. Yeah. Come on, Canon. Hey, we need this.
David Perry, if you are listening to this. Anyway.
No, it's so funny, along those lines, that's where, it's not like I don't a lot of times even have access to some of the other gear. Like I could borrow it from people or I could get it from people. It's just at the end of the day, I'm just looking for reliability. And not to say, I mean, and that's honestly what keeps me shooting what I'm shooting is just the reliability. And because gear and camera bodies, like I hate talking about that because honestly, I mean, they're all great. They're all going to capture great images. I mean, it's kind of like a black hole of photography where you start getting to like arguing over which body is better or which lens is better. It's just go make images.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing. I mean, everybody's photography is so different as well. It's very difficult to sort of pinpoint. There's this thing like when somebody asks you like, oh, what the age old, what camera should I get? Well, I don't know. What do you want to do with it? if that's a question,
what f-stop should I shoot at? I'm like, it matters. It totally matters. What are we shooting?
Yeah, exactly. Talking about f-stops, actually, we never really talk about f-stops on this.
Not once, not ever.
So, as you've probably figured out, really, the fact that this is, photography is really just a preamble for us to basically have a podcast. I think it's basically, what it is. But
same goes for us. Same goes for us.
Yeah, exactly. But there's one thing I did actually attempt in the past, and that is sort of star trail night photography, and I miserably failed at that.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I couldn't find the Milky Way. I actually don't think we can see the Milky Way from where we are.
You can't see in the UK. Well, certainly in the southeast of England where we are, you cannot see it here.
Yeah.
I think I may have seen a glimpse of it once. But the only time I've ever been able to see it is going over into Europe and in some of the open areas near the Mediterranean.
There's a story. I went to, my wife and I went to a wedding in the south of France. It was outside of Toulouse, so right in the countryside. And we landed relatively late, and had to get a hire car, and then it was like a 4-hour drive to the chateau where the wedding was happening. And so we're driving, and it was like about midnight, 1 o'clock or something in the morning. And we were driving through this forest, and I look up, and I saw the most incredible starry sky.
Mm-hmm.
It was insane. There was no light pollution. It was just like every single star there is decided to come out. It was just nuts. And so I stopped the car, in the middle of this forest. I got out, and I told my wife to get out of the car and look up. And she got out, looked up, and got scared, and got straight back in the car.
Why?
Because apparently there were too many weird noises in the forest.
All right.
But it is very true. Very true. When you're out there in the dark,
fascinated.
It's scary. It's scary, especially shooting here in Florida. There's a lot of noises.
Oh God, yeah. Was Dave Williams making Sasquatch sounds?
He probably jumped out of the. Yeah, he was probably in the woods.
He was there planting those footprints. I still think he planted those.
We spent a night with Dave Williams in the middle of nowhere.
Can you rephrase that?
Well, we did.
Oh, God bless you.
Yeah. Well, we did an episode with him out in the middle of nowhere, and so because he just finished his van, and we decided that would be a great opportunity to actually meet up out in the sticks somewhere, and and do an episode around the van basically. And so we ended up literally near the Welsh. Well, it was near the Welsh border.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
like out in the forest somewhere. And again, there were plenty of noises. And he kept telling us these Sasquatch stories. So we got slightly freaked out.
There you go.
At that point. But coming back to the Milky Way stroke, star photography.
That thing.
What can I say?
I'm sorry. All I heard was Milky Stroke, and it's just
anyway. So that's really that's the one thing I can sort of sympathize with in the sense that I've tried it, I miserably failed at it, and so I thought I'd take this opportunity to get some advice from you on how to get a great night sky image.
All right. So I think with this is another thing. It's just. It used to be really hard. It's so easy now. I am a big fan. You already talked about it. Photo Pills. That is the app. I mean, really, honestly, what you do is you just get yourself out to a dark sky location. And when I say dark sky location, you guys say, in England. I've seen some shots from England. You guys, it's just a matter of taking the effort to get right out there at the edge. And it is an inconvenience. It's definitely one of those genres that don't get into it because you like sleep. It's definitely going to be one of those where it messes with your sleep because you're having to go out and really do stuff at odd hours and odd settings and not ideal. It's dark. You're usually out in very weird remote places. So it's definitely not one of those things that's very easy to do. But I think once you do it, that's what getting over the hurdle. So really, when you get down the settings, Photo Pills will allow you to, when you get on the location, to hit your coordinate that where you are, and then hit this little button that says night augmented reality, night AR. It's night augmented reality. And you'll be able to hold your camera up and move it around and actually see where the Milky Way is, because your eyes don't really fully adjust when you first get to a location and you can't really tell. And photopills will nail it. It'll go like, hey, the Milky Way is right over here and it's right there. As long as you got clear skies and you can see stars, that Milky Way is going to come out. You can do a lot of things. But again, as long as you're in a lower, we have a scale that we measure stuff by, and night photography, it's a Bortle scale is what it's called. And it goes from 1 to 9. Well, where I live, it's an 8 or a 9. So I'm never going to capture the Milky Way here, but I can go 2.5 hours from here and I could be in a Bortle 4 or 5 transition point and perfectly capture the Milky Way. A lot of times it has to do with the direction that you're shooting. For example, where you guys are, if you are on the southern part of the island, so you were looking towards the south, looking off into the channel there or into the ocean, you've got little light pollution going forward in your frame. So all the light pollution is coming from behind you. So that's the first thing, is getting yourself to a place that's ideal to shoot. Then finding that location. Then all that's a matter of doing is that your first time is really setting your camera up for success. So what it has to do is, what is your widest lens with your widest aperture? So do you have an f16 2.8? You're going to be great. If your lowest aperture is maybe 4, you're going to be okay. If it's anything above 4, it's probably going to be hard for you to capture it.
Right.
So if you got an f2.8 and an f4, you open it up all the way, you take your focus and you just go to infinity at first. Now, you're not going to do this forever. You're going to get to where you understand that the stars are a little past infinity, and you're going to actually start using your live view and zooming in. But at first, again, we're keeping it simple. We're going to go wide open. We're going to focus to infinity. We're going to go into manual mode. We're going to set our exposure to 30 seconds. And then we're going to fire that frame for 30 seconds at ISO 6400. So we're just going to go 6400, 30 seconds at infinity, and we're going to fire it towards the Milky Way. And I guarantee when you get done with that frame, if it's clear skies and the Milky Way is there, you're going to have this reaction of, oh my gosh, what is that? Because it's going to look like what's over my shoulder over here. I mean, that's kind of what it's going to look like. Now you're going to, from there, get infected by it, and you're going to become consumed with it, and you're going to start dialing everything in. Then you're going to start using star trackers, and you're going to do all this craziness because you're going to get addicted to it. And that's how it was for me, at least, is, once you start getting into it, and that's happened countlessly with me, with people. I just had it happen. I was at a workshop teaching in South Dakota. So we were up in South Dakota, and we had people out on this, we were shooting a barn. And there was this barn, and we had the Milky Way there. And I knew it was going to be there. I knew it was going to work. I knew everybody, hey, set your cameras here and point in this direction and set it up. And then you hear that shutter kind of close, and you get that reaction. Whoa, what's that? That's amazing. Then you hear another person, the shutter, clicks down. They're like, oh, that's awesome. And it's just, that's what it is it's just getting to where I think the thing that people have a trouble with Milky Way photography is that ISO number. They get consumed with not going over like 1600 ISO, or they get consumed with noise. And at first, just start letting in that light, keep it very simple. And then as you move with your Milky Way photographer, you might start dropping down to 3200 ISO. You might, because you might end up having a lens that's wider than 2.8, and you can drop it down a little bit. You might get an f2 lens or an f1.4 lens, stuff like that. So that's at first. It's just keeping it wide open, boosting your ISO, keeping it open for that 30 seconds in manual, and focusing to infinity. And then you're going to, again, from there, you'll start dialing back down. In the 30 seconds, you're going to start getting star trails. But at first, they're going to be so minuscule that you're not going to notice them. It's only when you start getting into it. It's only other photographers, other astrophotographers that notice noise and star trails and all this other stuff that we obsess about. No person that's looking at your photo is like, oh man, if they exposed that at 20 seconds, they would have actually recognized the MPF rule, and that would have got them sharp stars, and it's like, no, that's what a photographer would say. That's not, other people go, wow, that's amazing. You shot that in England, or wow, you shot that in Florida. That's the shot right behind me. That's from the panhandle of Florida. That's right in the middle of, light pollution central, but it's just you're a couple hours away from light pollution, and you're just shooting towards the ocean.
Just in those couple of minutes of you just, describing what you just described, I really want to go out and do it.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
You made it seem so achievable, to get
really
going,
is.
and you're absolutely right. It is, man.
It really is. I mean, and honestly, if you're into like, the other thing that's really cool, and I see, like, I'm really passionate about rocket photography, but I'm like super passionate about night photography. Like, I love Milky Way. I love night photography. And unfortunately, right now, we're coming out of the season. A season for that core. So that thing that's glowing over my shoulder, that core, that's starting to go below the horizon when it's daylight. So during night, it's not visible. It's below the horizon. So there's different seasons for it. But that doesn't mean that you can't see the Milky Way all throughout the winter. It's just you're seeing the tail of it. You won't see that like big glowing section of it. Mm-hmm. But this is a great time for people to practice and get good. So that way next year, come March, when it rises again, you're ready to just like go right at it. Because you can still shoot it. It's just going to be the tail of it. You're going to get like a fainter kind of Milky Way to your shot, and it's going to line up a little different. But again, the same settings apply. It doesn't matter. What's cool about night is if it's dark, it's dark. Like the same settings apply. The things I told you work if it's night and you're shooting the Milky Way and it's this month or that month or whatever. The light doesn't change.
It's unfortunate that the Milky Way season is in the summer, where the nights are shorter anyway, so you get less time to get a good picture.
Especially the farther north you are, and that's the one thing is it helps with me. I say my season's coming to close. I can shoot in Florida all the way up till November because we're at such a low latitude. If you're in the southern hemisphere, forget it. You got way extra time, because you're in the southern. But the farther north you get, that's why. Spoiler alert, if you ever see a shot from Iceland that has the Milky Way core in it, it is fake. It cannot happen. At that high of a latitude, the core never gets above the horizon, like fully. So if at least never gets above the horizon fully at night is what I'm saying, where it could be absolutely a night shot. It could be, you could see it you can't see it during the day, but it's up during the day. And that's what happens. The daylight just drowns it out. So that's where if you start seeing Milky Way shots from Iceland or upper Norway or upper Alaska, like those are just fake. That's not possible.
Hope you're listening, Dave.
Dave, did you do this, Dave?
I've seen a lot of people do it. Now, if you go again to the southern hemisphere, that's where you can get winter shots, because in the southern hemisphere we're opposite. So the southern hemisphere, you get longer nights in the winter, but that's actually when the Milky Way core is up. So really, the awesome thing for Milky Way photography is to get to the southern hemisphere for those unique shots that you can't get, because you can't get winter shots here with the Milky Way. You can't get shots where the Milky Way's across the horizon at certain times of the year, where in the southern hemisphere you can. So it's really cool. Australia?
Yeah, I've been once. I need to visit my brother again.
There you go.
Yeah,
party time.
Done.
There you go.
Seriously, I'm gonna. It's one of those that even if you don't get a Milky Way, who cares? Like you say, go out and practice and try it out. And if you can get a sky that looks like what's behind you right now, without the Milky Way in it, without the planets and whatnot, it's great. You're nailing what you're going to be doing when it's season again. This is a good time to practice star trails and increase that. That shutter time. What are you doing tonight?
Pizza.
Pizza?
That's the first thing that comes to my mind.
No, you're driving, man.
Oh, there was another. Driving. We're in the middle of a petrol crisis, so there's no gas around here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have an electric car, so that doesn't affect me as much.
See, this is what I kept saying. So this is age-old discussion between Nick and I. So currently, as we're recording this, and of course this episode will actually go out in a few weeks' time. So maybe or maybe not, we'll be past the petrol crisis over here. But currently, as we're recording this, we're having a petrol crisis in the UK, which basically means the gas stations are all dry. And they can't get there's a driver shortage, and they can't get the trucks to basically service gas stations, and so therefore we can't get any gas.
And why don't we have those drivers? Why is that?
It's just definitely
some weird thing that happened.
Definitely not because of Brexit, but because that's a whole other thing.
Oh boy, let's not get into politics.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I know.
Let's not.
Crazy.
Let's leave that to Twitter. Let's leave that to Twitter.
Exactly. But
not just fuel. We're also having a pasta crisis.
And
I went into the supermarket for the first time in like 2 weeks today. Nothing.
Oh, also we're having a turkey crisis. This is the other thing, right? So Christmas, forget about turkeys. It's not going to happen over here.
Wow. Guess where? No, we are. We can. Guess where they're being imported from?
What's that?
Europe. You know, that place we used to be part of. Yeah,
nuts.
That one. Yeah.
So we're 1 million turkeys short currently. Can you believe it?
Is that right? Is that right? Is that what it is?
Wow.
It's nuts. Coming back to the subject, the vague subject of photography. There's one other shot I wanted to talk to you about. And that's the nebula thing, because I'm not really sure what I'm looking at there. It's like it's so fascinating, that shot. I'm like, what is this? Is this like a space nebula, or is it like?
I've definitely seen it in Star Trek.
This was one of the shots that I remember starting out, and some of the old timers, I call them, the old guys have been around. I've been here since the Apollo days. Blah blah blah. They kind of go like, well, what are you doing? Like, I'd be shooting way past when everybody else was shooting. I'd be trying new things, trying new settings, and I could see something was happening. And this again was where my Milky Way experience comes in, where with the Milky Way, you'll start seeing this like cloudy, muddy kind of like thing in the sky, and you'll be like, what is that? And then when you start realizing, oh, that's the Milky Way, and then you point your camera at it and you take an exposure and you hype up that ISO and you take that shutter speed and make it really long, these colors start coming out of it and they start popping. And I was like, I could see the same thing happening with rockets when they got during twilight or at night, especially at night when they would do these boost backs. So SpaceX would do these landings. There'd be all these gases mixing up there. And I'd be like, hey, this looks like how the Milky Way would look. I bet I could capture something. So what I started doing is just experimenting with different settings and start experimenting with stuff. And then, again, I kind of get poked fun at, of like, oh, that guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's only been out here a couple of years. He must be just an amateur, blah, blah, blah. And then I started getting it dialed in, and I started showing my editor what I was doing. And he's like, man, we gotta, like, how do we capture this? And I'm like, I got to get the right launch. So then we hit this launch where it was doing a boost back, and I caught this image, and it just, it blew up, where it was like, wow, I can't believe that's what's going on up there. And then the image you're talking about that has like the capsule going up, and then there's like this big nebulous gas up at the top of the image. So then there's these two things happening. That was actually a Falcon Heavy launch. So that was the SpaceX bigger rocket that had two side boosters that would come back to land. So what happened was you'd have the main booster going off into space, which is on the bottom of the image. There's like a point, and that's the main booster going off into space. The top of the image is actually the other boosters turning back, and they're burning their engines as well. So what ends up happening is all those gases that are up in the upper atmosphere get lit up by the rocket exhaust. So the light emanating from the rocket. and it starts mixing, and because it's very loose upper atmosphere, almost basically on the edge of space, these gases expand drastically. They have no resistance. So they're kind of just like growing almost. It's like just like emanating, and it just grows. So that becomes this frame up there, and that frame that you're seeing is actually, that is a full frame of a 400 millimeter. So I'm in at 400 millimeters, and that is not cropped. That is actually how big it is in the sky. That it is huge. I mean, if you think about it, if you zoom in your 400 millimeters at the moon and take a picture of the moon and see how small the moon is at 400 millimeters, imagine a rocket exhaust and gases filling up that entire frame, and that's what happens. And it's just, it's amazing to see. So then we were able to capture that. And now that's become a thing. That's become like a whole kind of shot that photographers go after now because of that. And a lot of times recently, my colleagues have started to get it. And it's the colleagues that actually believe me. And when I say that, I'll tell them, they'll ask me about it. I'm a teacher. I'm a trainer. I have no problem with telling you what settings. I have no problem telling you how long, how I shot it, what camera, whatever. And I tell, they'd ask. And there's tons of photographers like, no way. I'm not doing that. I can't boost my ISO that high. I can't do that, and just nobody would get it. And then when somebody started, some of my friends, like close colleagues started doing it, they started going, wow, that's working. And now I'm going to go a little farther. And now I'm going to go a little farther, to the point at which now it's become, again, like it's become a shot that people go after. But it's just one of those things where that's where seeing something and then pushing yourself and pushing your settings and pushing your technique to the point of being able to capture it, that's what allows you to do it. It's not always just a formula. That was a formula that was created. There was I didn't have anybody to practice. I didn't have any way to practice. It literally, and the only practice I did with that was Milky Way photography. But then it was kind of like reverse engineering that, because I had to get it to where my shutter speed would be so low that it would freeze the stars and freeze the rocket from moving and not blur, but long enough to let in enough light to where you would capture the colors and all the detail that's up there, but just long enough to where that didn't cause it to like look like some like slow panning shot. So it was just like finding this magic formula of the settings and the technique. And then now it's got to the point where it's getting to where I'm just trying new things now and trying different things to make it even more interesting. So given that, that's kind of the process.
Given that you don't exactly have a lot of opportunities to practice that, as did you literally just note down your settings and then just basically debrief yourself afterwards and go like, well, that didn't work, or maybe I'm going to try this next time? Was that the process?
Yeah, a lot of times what it is I'd find a launch that was very similar to it, or that I knew the first stage burn, it might not do a burst back, but the first stage burn is going to go up. So I'm going to see and what I do is just roll through settings. I'd be like, okay, what happens? And I'd just be shooting and rolling my ISO. I'd be shooting and rolling. I'd be in manual mode basically, and just kind of rolling through settings. So then later I could go back and go, wow, when I had it on, when I was letting in this amount of light, when I was, using this kind of support, and I was at these settings, it looked better than these settings. So that helped me kind of dial it in. So a lot of it is just, guessing and practice and just getting it down to where you can just rinse, repeat. And that's where we're at now, to where I could tell you, just like the Milky Way, I mean, there's a certain threshold of settings at night. And if you get within this threshold and you can, it's all a matter of how slow you can shoot, but still frame it up and keep it steady. It's an equation, and that's where it gets down to. It's just a matter of the settings, and you can capture it.
What I particularly love about that story is that half your colleagues going, no, and the other half, go, maybe but I can't do it. And once you explain the settings to them, they've got it and they've started to get it. That's going to set off other little kind of, I don't know, I can't think of the word right now. I was going to say like bells or whatever, something in their head going, but now I could go and try this in this way. And it might set them off on a whole new path of thinking about the way that they're taking their photos out there. And that's very, very cool that you've been able to spark that in those people.
You know, I sort of had almost like the exact opposite experience because I started my photography life in concert photography. And so I learned how to shoot under really weird lighting conditions, like basically in very low light situations. And so I got used to shooting at 3200 ISO, at like 2.8. And I remember when, I went from shooting concerts to actually shooting in daylight, and I used to think, somebody used to say to me, well, just set f8 and that's, usually you'd be fine. And I'm like, f8? No way I can shoot at f8. Everything's going to be black. There's no way I'll be able to see anything at f8. Because in a concert situation, that is what happens. F8 is you're not going to do anything. And so I could totally, I can sort of empathize. Can't say the word. With the idea of having to get over that mental obstacle, and actually just let loose and just do it and see what happens,
I think that's the hardest thing with photography is when we get that mental block that, and it's like releasing yourself to say, hey, maybe I can shoot in broad daylight at f2.8. Maybe I can. Okay, my shutter speed's starting to max out. Well, maybe I got to put an ND filter on there to counteract that. It's like once you start taking away those barriers, that's when it opens up. But if you have this like mental block that I always like, that's the worst is, like I can tell you the settings for like, this is what I would say, like we did with the Milky Way. Like, here's the settings for shooting a rocket lifting off at night. I mean, I can give you like the roundabout, but I'm always going to say, but on the other hand, it depends on conditions. I could tell you those settings and it was a foggy, hazy day. And you'd be like, Eric, my images look terrible. It's like, well, the weather conditions change the exposure, so that's part of like, it's only experience that can do that. Right. I mean, it's just, you've got to screw up in order to kind of get there,
Did you ever shoot any sort of accidents? Any like launch accidents or something like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, well, that's how so there's another shot that I started doing that was all a result of an accident. And that was there's usually we're going after the rocket, in a certain part of the frame where it's got the action of the the plume coming down, the rocket exhaust coming down, lighting up the pad. It's all there. And especially at night. And then that's what, I had, but I kind of just, experimented and I was doing experiments and then I had flipped my camera into aperture priority. And it kind of like, I had a negative exposure value like I usually do at aperture priority at a -1, which is usually what I would do in aperture priority. Right. So I was there and I in that mode had auto ISO on, and I was like, okay. And I had a minimum shutter speed and just what happened is the camera went off and it caught the pad where it was all lit up by the lights, but the ignition of the rocket where the all the ice had sheared off of it, the rocket exhaust was coming out, but it hadn't really fully illuminated. So it was one of those shots where, you were able to see something that you haven't really seen before because of an error, an accident. So I went, well, wait a minute, why don't I embrace that and try that and actually move towards using aperture priority to kind of get multiple shots per camera. And that's one of the things that now I've been doing is, especially at night launches, is actually using, I know what aperture I'd want, or I know what shutter speed that I want to hang around, and letting the camera adjust based on the lighting settings that are happening. That allows me to get shots that I normally couldn't get if I was just in manual mode. Because everybody says, oh, if you're going to shoot this, you got to be in manual mode. It's like, well, that's not true. I mean, there's only, and that's it. You could shoot about anything. It doesn't have to be manual. I mean, it's just going to be more pain. Like, for example, night photography, Milky Way photography, you're just going to be very painful if you ever want to shoot it in anything but manual, to the point at which you'll probably give up. But that's the thing with the rockets is, so out of that mistake comes something where now I actually embrace that mistake, and I use that mistake to get shots that other people weren't getting, and now the people again asking me, well, how'd you do that? Oh, I couldn't do that. I can't not go into manual. It's like, well, I don't know why you're asking me. A lot of times that's what's funny about it. It's like, I don't know why you're asking me if what I'm going to tell you, you don't want like the answer. But again, they always come full circle. I just had somebody again before this last launch, so we're the Inspiration 4 launch, call me up and say, hey, what was that thing again you were talking about? Because it was a night launch. And that thing you were talking about with the aperture priority. And I explained it to them again. And they're like, I think I'm going to try that with one of my cameras. And they did, and they got great stuff. So it's just a matter of getting over that mental block sometimes.
You do get stuck, don't you? In going, you I can't, no, I don't want to use that. I can't use that. It's not the way to do it. You shouldn't do it. About 1,000 different things. Balls to that. Your camera is capable of doing that aperture priority, shutter priority, whatever it might be. Use it. It's there. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, concept photography is one of those things. You speak to 10 different concept photographers, and they'll tell you 10 different ways of shooting a concept. And at some point, you got to find, you got to find your way of shooting something that you're comfortable with. Very often, one of the typical things you hear in concept photography is always like, oh, you get a freeze to motion, And it's like, well, I as a guitarist actually like to see movement in the right hand. I like to see that.
Absolutely.
So my settings are going to be vastly different from somebody else's settings, depending on what my, artistic vision is for the story that I want to tell when I shoot a concert, for example. Which incidentally, I haven't shot very many concerts in the last 18 months.
Well, and isn't that the thing though? Like what you're just talking about there with like that's what it's all about. It's like, what story are you trying to tell with the photo? Okay. And that's where, again, introducing that motion to somebody playing the guitar, what that can be powerful. Or I've seen great concert photos where just their head is actually tilting and you get that little bit of ghosting because, again, you're dropping your shutter speed around. It's telling me that there's motion, that there was an emotion happening. The crowd's going wild and their hands are moving, but their hands aren't frozen. They're like, blurring because they were jumping around or something. Adding that little bit of motion does something to accentuate the story maybe that you're wanting to do. So that's where sometimes just following, again, a formula, following the rules, it's not necessarily the right thing. And then sometimes from breaking those rules, you can find out something that you love. And then I find that those are the moments where your photography does break through because you're doing something that somebody else isn't doing or not willing to do. And not willing to sacrifice. I mean, again, that image that we were talking about, the nebula, it was shot at 51,000 ISO. Nobody has ever, when they've bought a print of it, said, oh, I can't hang this on my wall. It's shot at 51,000 ISO. Now, I have run noise reduction and I have done stuff to mitigate that. But at the end of the day, it's more about like, wow, that is a rocket up in space with two more rockets like coming to land like in one frame. Like that's what people are amazed by, not by the settings or how much noise was there or anything.
Yeah, sure. I mean, nobody cares about settings other than us photographers.
Other than photographers, yeah.
That's the thing.
And we are the niche of people that are looking at these images.
Yeah, we're the nerds.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you're also the vice president of operations for Kelby One. So that's your other kind of job, and of course, I'm sure many listeners and viewers on YouTube will recognize you from the grid. How did you first get involved with Kelby One originally?
So actually, I got involved with Kelby One years ago when we decided that, hey, we probably need to do this video thing online. That's actually where I got started, was coming in, and basically we were starting a business line called Kelby Training. We had just started doing when I started podcasting, video podcasting for Photoshop User TV. Right. So that's how it started. And actually, right before I started, they had started an audio podcast called Photoshop User TV, and then quickly realized that explaining Photoshop through an audio podcast was not going to work. And that's why, again, we went to video podcasting. Yeah. And then it just, that's where I started. And I started with, Kelby Training. We launched Kelby Training. We grew our company to where we were producing all this great online training content. Then we kind of merged companies again into this Kelby One, where we had the National Association of Photoshop Professionals and Kelby Training, merged these together to where it was just one membership where you could come and learn anything, be it Photoshop, Lightroom, or photography. It was like we cover it all. So that's really, and then from there, that whole time, again, I'm a video person, but my passion was photography. So I just started to absorb and learn new things. I cheated a little bit in that I got to hang out like a week in Paris with Jay Maisel. Like that was like photography, like taking your photography and like amping it up to 11 because you're like sitting next to a legend in Paris and he's telling you all of the secrets of like what's important and what isn't. And when you start absorbing that stuff, and then I'm going like, I better listen to this guy. I mean, everybody like they love his images. I love his images. And then you start absorbing this stuff. But what's so great about Kelby One is those same stories or those same things, anybody can watch it because, we have 3 classes with Jay Maisel just on Kelby One. And it's just like 3 hours of just like if you want to master your photography, just listen to the guy. Now, what people tend to do is do the same thing that my friends would do. And they'd say, I can't do that, or that doesn't apply to me. But if you start like really stopping and listening to that, so much information. And that's helped my photography so much because that's where I started realizing I needed to slow down. He was the one who told me to slow down. And then, there's other things like, being able to focus on my style of photography, looking at things like lighting more intently, all these things that were born out of it. So I did that and then, became again with this photography thing to where picked up this genre of rocket photography and kind of ran with it. And that's where we are today.
Fantastic. And of course, there are some of your, or quite a few of your courses are available on Kelby One.
Yeah. I teach everything from, we do Milky Way photography. We actually did a class on rocket photography. We were able to go on NASA property. We were covering a launch. We got credentials for it. And we actually showed people like how to do all this, how to do the pad shots, how to do streak shots, how to do telephoto shots, all from a rocket launch. But that's a big thing that's our thing with Kelby One. Like when I taught a Milky Way class, we were like out in the Southwest of the US in the Grand Canyon, or we were out in the Mojave Desert, or we were, in Zion National Park. Like we were in the things. Like we're not like just, hey, we're just going to teach you like, we're just going to talk about it. We're actually going to go out and do this stuff or other things, like we teach aviation photography where like Moose Peterson is like up in the planes shooting air to air, or Joe McNally is like in New York City with the ballerinas on set. Like we're making the class happen live, like working photographers showing you what they're doing, and then we also have inspirational classes. We also have software classes, but that's really our thing is like, we want it to be like immersive or to be like something that's real or authentic.
Interesting. We had Moose Peterson on, didn't we, a few months ago?
Yeah.
Joe would.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Joe's going to be at our portrait photography conference. I was just talking to him the other day. So he's going to be at we're doing we've started during this pandemic to do these very immersive events. We're always have been into creating events for photographers. We've had Photoshop World for years. We've produced Photoshop World. We've had people all over the place come to Photoshop World. Usually we were doing them in Orlando and Vegas. Obviously, with the pandemic, that changed. So we had to kind of do something different. And what we decided to do was really create these immersive online events for people to have that same experience. And some people are actually liking the experience way better because they don't have to take time away from work. They don't have to travel. Now, some people I know want to get back to that, and we will get back to that. But at the end of the day, it's great to have that outlet for people. So that's like the one we're doing. We were just talking to Joe about. We're doing a portrait photography conference with 10 portrait photographers, and they're going to come on and teach classes on a wide range of topics. But again, it centers around portrait photography. So that way, if you're into that, and that's something that you want, and you want 2 days of very immersive training, you're able to get that with one-on-ones, being able to ask questions, being able to watch all this content. And then what's great about the online format is that it allows people to also watch this stuff for a whole year, or buy it and say they can't come for those 2 days, still get that training for an entire year. So, which is something that we weren't able to do with the way we used to do it with just a physical event.
Yeah. And so are you going to continue to keep those trainings in that way moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, people, we're big into doing stuff that our members want and love, and we're big on feedback and surveying. And from what we hear from our members and our people that want to come, that they like this format. So yes, we'll probably continue that format. There's obviously it's an interesting time, right? Because I think we have to embrace the change that will be this post-world COVID world that we're going to be moving into, that we're already moving into. But you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where we have to embrace those changes and not fight those changes. And that's kind of what we're doing here, is like, there's certain training that it might be better in this format, and there's certain training that might be better in that format. And those are the kind of the good things that come out of these bad things sometimes, where, even though it's a bad thing, you're able to kind of step back and learn something from that. So I think that's what's helped us. I mean, I've noticed that even with my daughter and her education, and how that's changed, and what that's going to be like. I mean, what is that going to be like now? So it's just very interesting to see, like, if we could embrace that and say, hey, maybe this way of doing it is better than that way of doing it. Then, because like that's always been the thing, like trade shows, it's great that we could do those trade shows, but certain things that we did were probably not the best format to do them like that, where there's other things that we probably could do more of in person, that just it'd be better to have more hands-on experiences or more intimate workshops and stuff like that, be personal. But these large lectures where you're in a room, I remember back in the day going to NAB, which is the National Association of Broadcasters for Video, and you'd be in a hall with 10,000 people, 5,000 people listening to a talk or a lecture. Then, like, this could have happened via an online meeting and had the same effectiveness. So I think that's where it's going to be one of those where we're going to have to really pick and choose and kind of fit that in better. And so that's a good thing, I think, that came out of this, is getting us to like rethink how we're doing stuff.
You can bring more people into the fold as well by doing things in that way. Your overhead costs are potentially cheaper. Ticket costs for those people attending can be cheaper as well because it's online. Provided they got a way to ask questions, whatever that might be. That's a good thing for those people.
That's the thing,
not for everyone, obviously. But.
No, but I mean, generally speaking, it's important to find opportunity in a situation like this. I mean, you got to make the best out of a bad situation in general. And there's certain things. An interesting thing, for instance, that's happened in the camera club world, for example. Where you have speakers traveling to a camera club meeting, blah blah. And of course, during the pandemic, a lot of that moved to Zoom, and then all of a sudden, you could have speakers who weren't local, You could have speakers from overseas who could via Zoom, do their presentation, and you kind of think, why did nobody ever think of this before? Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And of course now, but with things going back, there's a lot of thought put into like, okay, well, maybe we can keep a Zoom component. Of course, people still want to meet up in person or whatever. But when you have a speaker, there's really no reason why you can't have a speaker from abroad or, from a place 8 hours away. If they do something really interesting, that's really captivating and, a real asset, then why not? And technology makes that possible quite easily, I actually have my first real life speaking arrangement or engagement in a couple of days after not having done anything like that in 18 months. And I quite like doing stuff on Zoom, to be honest.
Yeah. Is that because you're naked from the waist down?
Well, yeah, nobody knows. Nobody knows. So you don't even see
right.
below the
You're
camera.
like a newsreader.
That's right. Yeah. Do you remember when we did that at the beginning?
Where's this going?
Well, do you remember when we did that photo? We did.
We were on camera.
We'll play this photo in a second. But so we, this is everybody listening to this podcast will know this, obviously, because we talked about this many times. But this podcast is actually a consequence of the pandemic. Nick and me literally lost all of our projects when the lockdown hit originally in 2020, and after spending a couple of weeks watching Netflix, we sort of figured, we got to do something creative, and so we thought, like, why not start a podcast, basically, and so and now that things have gone back to more or less normal, we've just this has just become part of our lives. We love doing it. We're doing it every week. It's turned out to be such an interesting thing to do, and getting to speak to really interesting people, and getting to learn a lot. For us, we learn tons of stuff every time we speak to somebody, or we have a guest on the show, and hopefully that translates to our listeners. But at the very beginning, we started doing some photo competitions because, of course, at the time we had to make these podcasts from our respective homes and then edit it together afterwards because we weren't able to meet in the same place. And so I'll be filming myself in my place, and Nick would be filming himself in his place, and we have a conversation and we cut it all together. And so we did. There was one photo competition that we did, which was a day in the life of a music teacher, I think it was, or something like that. And so, do you remember that one?
Yeah, I do.
And so that was exactly, that was kind of the photo that I made.
That was fun. That was.
Yeah, it was. I made this image where I was teaching on Zoom, and it was complete chaos around me, and I was literally having, I was wearing swimming trunks.
Were they swimming trunks? Well, I thought they're skid-marked Y-fronts.
No, they're actually swimming trunks. But I had my feet were in like a foot bath under the desk, and it was like total chaos and pandemonium going on around me. But of course, all the student could see on Zoom was this small square of perfection behind me, But that was what our lives were like actually at the time,
Yep.
Yeah. Too true. That was fun.
But yeah,
it is very true. Very true. But that's the beauty of it, is I think this, if we embrace that, those changes, and that's a big thing that we've been talking about that around, our offices, and just that's really been our driving force, is like how to help people, and especially in this new way of doing it, and making sure that we're doing it in the most effective way for people. And the most like basically what's going to be you're going to get the most out of it. We don't want to do anything that's just gimmicky, or, we're not about that, and we also, want to do something that, has worth, that isn't just trying to get you to sign up for this free event in order to sell you 5 other things or spam you to death. We're just like, this is what we do, like we're around the office, like we're all helpers, we're all trainers, we're kind of all like that. It's just in our DNA that we just want to help people, and that's really our driving force.
Okay, so lastly, I just want to come back to the cinemagraphs. You mentioned an app called Plotterverse. that you use to create those. How does that? Can you explain how that works?
Sure. So they have an iPad version, they have an iPhone version, they have an Android version, they have a desktop version. But basically, it is a piece of software that just allows you to load in your image. And then all you're going to do is go through the different settings with it. They have them laid out kind of in order of what you would do. So basically, you have the ability to mask certain areas or not mask certain areas. So thinking about it, if I want something to be animated, I'm going to say, don't mask that area. But if there's parts of my image that I say, I don't want this to be animated, because a lot of times the cinemagraph, what you want to do is have something in the image flowing like it would in real life if you were shooting video with it, but the other parts of the image to be still, so it kind of plays with your mind. And you're looking at it, you're going, is that a still photo? Is that a video? Is that an animation? You're just not sure. And I think that's what's so cool about cinemagraphs, right? And so you have that ability to mask. Then what you're going to do is tell it, well, what do you want to move? What do you not want to move? So you'll set anchor points. And an anchor point would be like a point, for example, with me, the point at which a rocket flame comes out. I do not want anything above that flame or the rocket to move. I want the flame to be moving. So I'll set anchor points along there. Just like, say you were shooting somebody, and you had a flowy dress that, you had a model in a flowy dress and you wanted to make the dress flow. Well, you might want to set it to where you mask out the body, but the anchor point might be the floor, that you don't want anything on the floor to move. You just want the dress to move. So then you would set motion points to basically what you want to move. So then you've got stuff masked that you don't want to move. You got stuff unmasked that you do. You got anchor points set for the points that you don't want to move, and you got motion points for the points you want to move. And then you basically set a feathering. If you want, like, how much of the edge do you want to feather? Do you want to blend into an edge and stuff like that? And then you just animate. You just hit the play button and animate it. And then if you don't like what you're doing, you hit pause and you start deleting points and moving it around, and you hit play again. And that's where I got a whole course on it on Kelby One, where we just went over all different types of photos, because I know that my photos are, unique in the sense of not too many people go, oh, yeah, it works great on rocket photos, but it also works awesome on so many different types of photos. Sports photos, it works really great. Like, say I've done one where it's like a dirt bike and the wheels kicking up the dirt. And so if we can make the wheels spin, we can make the dirt kick up, but the bike is stationary and the rider's stationary and nothing's moving, but the wheel and the dirt's being flown around. Well, that looks amazing. Or another one of the guys who shot for the NFL contacted me once and said, hey, I'd really love, can you do something with this shot? And, it was a guy coming out of the tunnel with smoke and fireworks and pyrotechnics. And, just set the anchor points and make the fire animated. But then the athlete is running out and he's frozen. So it looks very bizarre because you got the smoke and the flame. So my point being is you can do any type of photo that has some motion in it. Say you're a landscape photographer and you want the clouds to start moving and you want the water to start moving. You can set those animation points and you can just animate the photo. And what's cool about that is I think that's going to be it's definitely starting to become a growing thing, especially with like things like NFTs, right? Where a lot of people love animations when it comes to NFTs, and being able to take and animate your photo. It's a great way to get into something like that, because not a lot of in that NFT space. I mean, not a lot of people are getting into like still photos. It's usually got to be some kind of animation or some kind of, something with a GIF or, something like that, or a video or some just quirky thing. And cinemagraphs, I think, are really starting to play into that very well. So it's definitely something to play around with and get into. And then just, it's got that stopping power. When you're scrolling on social media and you come by it and it's playing this video, but you're not, again, your mind just goes, that's not a video. That's a still photo. It's not moving, but this little part of the photo is moving. It's bizarre. It just doesn't look right. So you're kind of thrown off.
Got to give that a go.
No, for sure.
Never done that. Never done that.
I'm definitely gonna try that. because like I said earlier, but when I used to make little cinemagraphs, I used to do it in I think I used to sort of jump back and forth between Final Cut and Photoshop. I used to animate stuff in there and like blend different things together. It was more like it was a pain in the neck.
It makes me feel slightly ill hearing you say that. That sounds very painful.
There you go.
Hey, the thing with that, and this is like, that's the beauty of it. You can, Photoshop is amazing. Final Cut is amazing. These programs Final Cut is like, or any that Premiere, you can make motion pictures with it, right?
Sure.
But it's also super deep, just like Photoshop. Like you can get lost in it. And it's not that you can't make a cinemagraph with Photoshop. You totally can. It's just it's the thing of where is your end product going and what is your time investment? Because to me, a lot of the times it goes to, in life, what's the only commodity, right, that you can't take back, you can't make more of? It's time. Like you can't make more time. It doesn't matter what you do. Like time is this time that we're spending here, it's spent. I can't go backwards. So that's our biggest commodity in life, right? So if we can have a tool that can get something done in I could do a cinemagraph, a plotograph, a really decent one in 5 to 10 minutes. Where that same thing, I could go into Photoshop, but it's going to take me 50 minutes to an hour maybe to do the same thing. It's like, I can't get back that time, and now it just matters. I mean, if the cinemagraph, if the software couldn't do the exact thing you wanted to, well, then you got to spend more time at it. Well, that means you're investing that time. You better be getting something back for that time, and that's a big thing, like if you're going to invest that time, just don't be spending hours and hours wasting time on something when you could get it done in 5 minutes.
I think I spent probably the best part of a day creating this thing because I had this Rubik's Cube and I hung it from a C stand with like fishing wire and I filmed the whole thing and it was just, oh man, it just took all day to make. It was good fun. But yeah, I mean, it definitely took it took a lot of time, but it was well worth spending the time at the time because the result was pretty cool.
And you learn things from it, right?
And I learned to never do it.
But the point being, if you could tell somebody, hey, there's an app where you could study the rocket trajectory and you could know exactly, given your GPS coordinates, where it's going to go. You, out of your experience, would tell somebody, hey, go do that, because you don't want to do what I did in Photoshop and do this Rubik's Cube. It was a good learning experience for you, but if there's an app that could do that in 5 minutes, why not tell people about it? Why not? And why don't people try it? Just try it.
I find it just as fascinating as the face app that we tried the other day.
Oh man.
There's this app that basically animates your face to music. It's hilarious. That was an evening's entertainment, I tell you.
I hate when you get hooked on those little things. Yeah. That's all I receive for about a day.
I kept animating Nick's face to lots of different songs and just sent them over to him like every 5 minutes.
There you go.
I think I blocked you for 24 hours.
No,
I'm joking.
That was fun. Well, Erik, I hope you feel that the time you spent with us was time well spent. Obviously, it was.
Oh, I do. I mean, I love. There's nothing more that I love than helping other people, and that's a good investment of my time. But that's just me. Like I love, and I hope that's what people got. I'm just telling you things and just sharing life experiences, so you don't have to make the same mistakes or invest that time, or know that there is a product out there that could save you time. And that's a win for me because I want to see what other people can create from that, by having those tools like we talked about earlier. It's amazing what we can do when we share with other people and then see what they can do to make it even better.
Exactly. And it totally comes across that way as well. Listening to you talk this evening is quite inspirational and encouraging to hear it. It makes me feel excited to go out and try some of the things that you've just been talking about. And, if you can get that across to people, well, you're winning.
That's the win.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Erik, thank you so much for being our guest on the show today. It was an
thanks for having me.
Education. It was super fun. I certainly learned a ton of new things that that we'll put into action at some point, for sure. So again, thank you so much, Erik, for being on the show.
Maybe we get Erik to critique some of our nighttime photography one day.
Or cinemagraphs.
Or cinemagraphs.
Ooh,
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, if you're up for that, we're definitely up for making some, for sure. So we have come to the end of this week's episode. Again, be reminded, if you have made it so far on the audio version, you can rewatch the whole thing over on youtube.com/camerashake, where you can not only hear our sultry voices, but can also see our beautiful faces in full Technicolor. Last thing, if you so desire, you can head over to camerashakepodcast.com, hit the join the community button, and join our small but illustrious community. We will not bombard you with newsletters, clearly, but you will get an insight behind the scenes, which should be fun. Anyway, that being said, that's it. Episode 79. We'll be back with episode 80 next week. See you next week. There you go. Boom.